Howdy, it's me again, Calder. I'm here to go over the third part in our series of modeling, animating, shading, and creating essentially what I created. I always forget that's reversed. When I made this over here. Hold on one second as I turn off the Twitch audio and don't want to hear my little echo anymore. As I was saying, we're going to be going over how to actually animate the stuff. This is the third part in a 4-part series about how I made almost every aspect of it. But we're not going to be doing every little detail, obviously. My goal is often just to give you the sort of resources to extrapolate from the files that I have already given you and sort of go from there. Hopefully, the stuff that you learn here you can apply to your own files. I've also structured this so that it is less typical than a lot of other traditional Blender or animation tutorials. We're not going to be doing a humanoid walk cycle. We are going to do looping animation. We are going to go over the 12 principles of animation, which I will pop up right now. And we're going to use them and how they apply to not only this, but pretty much anything that you will make in any sort of animated function. This stuff is kind of the Bible for a lot of animators, myself somewhat included. You don't have to keep them in mind with everything you ever do, but you'll be hard-pressed to find an animator who is not even like slightly familiar with this stuff. This is kind of the big stuff that you gotta learn. We're gonna probably go over them one by one in a little bit. But first things first, as I said, the files and the rigged character that we'll be playing with is going to be present in the Discord and Game Jam Central. Again, I'm in Meetup voice if you want to ask questions. I'll be able to hear you. And if the questions are relevant, I will turn the desktop audio on this and let everyone talk to you in the Twitch. I will check back and forth from the Twitch periodically just to make sure everything is fine. But at the same time, I will mostly just be in the program and on OBS. So if I don't respond to you immediately, just give me a second and I'll try to be dutiful about looking at that stuff. Anyways, as I said, we're going to be going through this stuff. We're going to be going through this. We've already done rigging. We've already done modeling. If you want to look at that stuff, it's in previous videos. It should be the last 2 that we have up on our YouTube and our Twitch VODs, in addition to a number of other more complex modeling tutorials we have on our YouTube, but this might be the first time we go through just actual strict animation. So anyways, I'm gonna put the principles down here. We're gonna go into our computer cam and we're gonna take a look at our guy. If you're listening or followed along the last tutorial, this is our guy. I have done a few things to make him a little bit different, but none of them are too major. Most of them are just little things that I'm actually going to put these up here. It will become more relevant as times go on, so I'm going to make them bigger later. The only big differences is I've changed his foot to a controller as well. If we wanted to, we could make this foot controller far larger. Pretty easy. We could just use the base object it's referencing and make that bigger. Oh yeah, that's right. You have to make it bigger in edit mode. I don't know. It's kind of funny how different controllers are in Blender than they are in Maya. Looks like that one is also on a different rotational axis, but whatever. We're gonna just roll with the punches on this one. I don't want to waste y'all's time. Unless we can fit this very quickly. We're in object mode. Then we go back. And let's see if our custom object, yeah, there we are. Yeah, we can change that right here. So we'll just change the rotation to 90. And to match up the foot positioning on the other one, we're going to crank the Z up a little bit. And we'll have a better foot controller here. It is nice how some of this stuff works, I'll be honest, but I do kind of prefer the NURBS circle system of Maya. It just feels sort of less painful in some ways to attribute controllers to. But again, we're done with the rigging course, so we ain't going to be talking about that. Once again, if you'd like to see how I edited that stuff, I'll do it once again for you. Since that was already vertical, probably on y'all's one, after I made it bigger, I'm going to move me and everything else out of the way. And so just, yeah, I'm going to make this a little smaller. Follow this stuff right here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to click on our armature, press tab. We're going to click our bone. I have no idea why this is the thing I have to do. Press tab again, and you'll see that custom shape is showing up. It'll have circle. And all we have to do is rotate 90. That's on the y-axis, and on the z-axis, bring it forward to whatever you feel comfortable with. Might actually even do the same thing on this one, so we can just bring it up a little bit further. This isn't too important, and you'll also see that these aren't like as rotationally attached as other controllers normally are. But we're just kind of rolling with what we got here, y'all, so don't worry too much. It won't really affect too much in the long run, and we have plenty of parameters that we can change in the meantime. Anyways, that is our guide. And what's more important right now is that we get out of layout and we go to animation. Animation is really useful because we get a constant sort of no mess display of what's over here. Makes it very easy for us to reference our animation without our rigs, without a lot of visual clutter, and get a good idea of what's going on there. You can see right now I am scrubbing through my timeline. What that means is I'll grab this guy over here, and I'll sort of drag him back and forth to get a good idea of what the key motion is. If you want to see stuff in real time, just press play. Sometimes over time it won't go at the target frame rate, but don't worry about that. You can clear cache, you can do a lot of other stuff to make sure that works properly. We probably will not have that issue right now. If your computer cannot run at the desired frame rate, there are a couple things you can do. You can turn off material properties like this. I have no idea why this stuff is still translucent. It really should not be. But either way, once you do that, it may run a little smoother. See how it's now hitting 60 on the dot. All that's fine. I think the project settings for y'all should be set at 60 as well, but if it's not, go to the little printer here. You'll have a frame rate you could choose 60. Obviously for other projects, these other frame rates make sense. Typically a lot of motion design and a lot of filmic stuff goes at 24. 30 frames per second can be totally fine for a lot of stuff. 60 frames is obviously what we usually hear as a standard for games. I don't want to even start that debate. I think it's silly. I think 60 is nice. I think 120 is nice. I think 240 is nice. I think 24 is nice. It just all sort of matters on what you are trying to achieve with what you are trying to make. That said, that's a worthless argument that we're not going to have for right now. We are going to look at the dope sheet here. What is the dope sheet? Well, if we want to get a better idea of what the dope sheet is, let's click into another one of our rigs. We're going to object mode. We're going to click on the sort of armature here. We're going to go into pose mode. Press A to select all of it, and we'll see that there are these keyframes that I've placed here. And those all stack up to certain aspects of motion that I wanted this guy to do. I moved the bones on this character to a certain time, and the space in between is the computer interpolating how to do that in the right way. If you want to look at it in a more interesting way, we can go away from dope sheet and go to graph editor. We can see if those same keyframes are here, and it doesn't look like they are, which is slightly concerning. Oh, there they are. And that, for more experienced animators is where you see the wonderful things that are curves. And curves are sort of Bezier stuff that you can tweak to get into fine-tuned motions and get really good arcs in your animation. What are arcs, you may ask? Well, let's go through all of this stuff really quickly before we go too far. Sorry, this is going to be slightly theory-oriented. I think that just knowing how to animate stuff in this doesn't necessarily mean that you make good animation. It can mean that you often just sort of make sloppy stuff. So you should know how a lot of this stuff works and what it does to work with that. So let's start with squash and stretch. Pretty simple one right here. We can see a lot of squashing and stretching on not only the guy's head over here, but also on our little peach friend here that sort of squeezes up and down and changes its orientation as it goes up. This actually wasn't my final keyframes when I did the thing, but we can see that motion sort of transfers upward and outward, and if it moves down, it'll transfer across. If it goes up, it goes like that. I don't know. Basically, you want to show that the inertia of whatever movement that you're trying to portray kind of moves through the body of what you're doing, and it creates a very sort of easy visual thing for people to look at and draw their eyes into. And a lot of animation is sort of the trickery of getting people to look at the things you want to look at, not just the trickery of making things look like they're alive. Timing and motion. The easy way to think of timing and motion to me was always, you can make something in less frames look faster by being smart, but more frames often sort of make things seem a little slower. So like if you had two things going across something at the same time, and you can actually see it in this picture, using less frames will achieve a springier look than having more frames. In addition, like timing and motion is exactly what it sounds like. Some of the stuff to me has always felt like a little nebulous, but I'm sure other people in the chat can be wise to a greater definition. Essentially, just keep in mind that knowing when to hit your mark can sell an animation far better than just hitting your mark arbitrarily, and knowing how that sort of works in relationship to whatever you are animating and the speed or the weight or the gravity with which that object moves is very important and will make your animation far more compelling to watch than maybe a sort of one-to-one representation of motion or just the first thing that comes to your head. Either way, don't worry about it. If it seems sort of nebulous, you'll sort of get the hang of it as things go on. Anticipation, think wind up to a punch, think the rev and then the screech and then the car driving off. Think Sonic revving up his legs and going in a fast circle, then hopping on the ground and zooming off. Give like a sort of tell that something is going to happen before it happens, and it'll draw your viewer's eye into what you want to have happen. For instance, maybe you could say that is the case with this man fluttering his fingers underneath the sort of rotating orb here. I definitely had some anticipation with the actual flyer here, having the goop sort of spray out into the thick cauldron and then having it pop out afterwards. You can follow the eyes to have a little more anticipation. Basically just give people a tell. Let them know that something is going to happen visually before you let it happen, and it'll often sell the animation that much better. Staging is exactly what it sounds like. When you're going to set up any sort of animation, make sure that you can find the angles with which it works best. For my specific one, I wanted a slightly upward angle that I could move the camera around so you could see more details. We can go over more of that in our rendering tutorial, because typically I don't mess around with cameras too much until rendering. However, saying that out loud, I also realize right now that maybe I should. But it's essentially like how you choose to display what you're animating. So anyone can have, like, staging, I guess in a more deliberate, obvious sense, is like I chose to put my camera over here maybe because I like a certain side of my face, maybe because I think it looks more interesting to have it coming up on me. Just think about where you put things in relationship to each other in order to make a more compelling scene. Follow through and overlapping action is pretty... Oh, I just realized for some of the stuff I had the stuff in front. I'm sorry. I'm going to put it kind of over here for now on. Follow through and overlapping action, basically know that, like, I don't want to sound too Newtonian. With every action there is a equal reaction, but I think the little drawing there does a good sort of interpretation of it. Let's say your creature has a tail. The tail, when you come to a stop, it's not just going to stop statically. It's going to sort of bend over. It's going to follow the motion through into the next frames as one part of the motion sort of stops. If I were to look for follow through here, honestly, maybe not. I guess the follow through here would a lot of it just sort of be how things clunka with the eyeballs on this guy. You see how when he jumps, the eyeballs sort of follow afterwards as if they're sort of transferring the motion from his little hops into the little eye stalk tentacles up there. That's what I would consider follow through for this animation. Straight ahead and pose to pose. So let's say you're doing a walk cycle. You typically are not going to do every little frame like one into each other. You will probably start with your on, over, oh god, there's like 6 keyframes to a walk cycle, and I'm sure animation nerds will hate me for not remembering it, but essentially you have your 2 feet on the ground, your back foot up, back foot over, back foot down, back foot through, etc. So you're just sort of tracing where each foot will go, and we're going to go more into pose to pose specifically in a little bit, but straight ahead is if you're animating like without as much of a sort of game plan, where you would sort of be going from, like, I don't know, I like doing straight ahead for certain, like, when I say organic, it's often different thing, certain very sort of gestural motions, often like something that's not as sort of routine as a walk. So it could be like a hand motion, or like something sprouting, or I don't know, fire. A lot of VFX to me is probably done very well in a straight ahead work set. But for things that are often very, honestly, for a lot of stuff that you will use a lot in games, pose to pose is what you're going to be using. And for the most part, I think for character animation, pose to pose is the sort of style that most people will default to. Slow in, slow out is pretty simple. Nothing sort of starts out like this. Everything you see accelerates and comes to a stop. It doesn't just sort of magically... No one goes 0 to 60 in 0.0 milliseconds, right? It takes at least a second or so. So between that time, you try to show that your thing gets faster along that time. And as it comes to a stop, you let it come to a stop. Oftentimes you can even use overlapping action to show that stop going a little bit further there. Trying to think of slow in, slow out stuff here. Honestly, slow in, slow out, you can see his eyeball, you can see his tongue. That was some of the stuff I deliberately thought about doing slow in, slow out. Anyways, arcs. Arcs, in the literal sense, think gravity, think that things go hop up, and bounce around. In a less literal sense, arcs kind of do fit into a lot of the other stuff like slow in, slow out, and overlapping animation, insofar as like things have initial, like a lot of inertia that can taper off into smaller and smaller things. Basically just know that like there are certain rhythm. I always think of arcs as like, yeah, there's sort of like a gravitational rhythm and stuff like that. That stuff will often take, and like visually, people like to follow arcs. So I don't know. There's a lot of animation study stuff out there that loves arcs. Exaggeration, to me, exaggeration might be one of the most important parts of 3D animation, period, especially in games. Exaggeration sells your animations way more than like almost anything else here. You have to let people really know where to look at for games, because oftentimes there can be so much stuff going on at any point. So like if someone takes a punch, it's a real wallop, right? It's never just this realistic thing where the guy sort of flinches. If somebody falls down, he falls on his face and bumps. If he gets hit, he's all the way knocked 10 feet away and on his butt and crying or something like that. Like if you want something to really sell, make sure to exaggerate. People are going to appreciate it, and they'll also know what to look at. And like a lot of things, if they're too subtle, you may think that you're being smart or something subtle, but no one's going to think you're smart if they don't notice what you see. Secondary action, to me, secondary action, overlapping action, follow through have a little bit of overlap, but basically like know that one thing does in a scene can affect other things, as well as like if you do one thing, maybe you end up doing another thing. Like let's say that I'm talking to you right now and I'm also nervously tapping on my can of LaCroix, right? Like I find myself getting a little parched, so I do that and I have to do something else afterwards, or like just know that there is more to a single animation, and secondary actions often sell things a little bit more and make them seem more natural. I often like to think of people like with nervous tics with secondary actions, but as this obviously shows, like know that an action that is an environment will probably sell that action to other characters and creatures around it. So I guess I don't know, bystanders and stuff like that in bigger animation. Solid drawing, you may not think is important in 3D, but knowing solid drawing and pose to pose sort of go hand in hand together. Know that you have to have a pretty solid like pose to go to interpolate to, that lets people to look at and lends people to look at something and really believe it's there. Really, like if you want to see a solid drawing not working out, look at every time a trailer comes out of some animation or some movie or something like that, and someone freeze frames on like some weird in-between frame, which honestly you would never notice. Well, solid drawing will help you never get made fun of. Anyways, appeal is the cute stuff. Appeal is doing little things that people will see and maybe like, oh, that's nice. Oh, that's cute. Appeal is just appealing to your audience. I like a lot of appeal stuff personally. It's just fun for me to do that. But I think you'll find ways to put appeal in almost any animation. That's the 12 principles. I'm going to keep them over here. Surprisingly, we're probably not going to be using this bottom bit too much. We're going to go into animating right now. I'm going to check on our chat. Okay. Oh, it's Dell. Anyways, that's 12 principles. You should know the 12 principles. You should probably even study the 12 principles on your own if you can. I'll try to bring up the 12 principles as we get to work. But sorry if that's a retread for a lot of y'all. I'm sure it is. Especially if you've animated before, you'll know them. Anyways, let's go into pose mode. Pose mode, and first actually let's go into object mode and unselect that, and let's go into pose mode. Select our armature for pot guy, and you can press tab, or you can just press pose mode, and there you are. We'll have all of our guys up here. In a more professional rig, you'll have better controllers, but since we made this rig ourselves, and we're not going to spend 30,000 years on it, yeah, honestly, Dell is right in the comments here. You can hear the 12 principles for years and still not get them. You'll start understanding them better, but there's always I don't know anyone who honestly thinks all 12 in mind every time they do something. It's just like I like them almost as a reference point. That if something's not really working in my animation, it's good to go back and see if that sort of helps. Also really helpful if you're trying to like critique a friend's work or something like that. Gives you like good precedence to your criticism instead of just sort of sounding like a mean dork. Anyways, if you're wondering why this is starting at frame 30, tell you the truth, the only reason why this stuff starts at frame 30 is because I was doing a fluid simulation earlier on this same sort of thing. We're not going to be doing fluid simulation. To tell you the truth, I think it's such a limited use case for almost anything. I'm pretty upset that I spent so much time using fluid simulation stuff for this particular animation because it has nothing to do with game stuff. But anyways, one thing I like to do, I like to go a frame behind whatever I'm making. Press A to select your entire model and just keyframe the T-pose. For me, it just sort of creates a good base that you can go back to if you need to. Doing that means that like whenever I go and make a new keyframe, I can go back into it and I can think about where I'd want something to be, or reset easier. The good thing is, since I went ahead on this and reset all the transformations and stuff like that, if you do feel like something's getting into a weird position and you want something to go back, much like Maya, you can move your stuff. I forgot that it does the ankle on this one. Let's say we want to do that, and we can zero out all of our rotations and transformations, just going into our transform panel, pressing 1 on the W, and 0 for the X, Y, and Z. And the same goes for the IK controller here. And now his foot is mostly where it should be. The truth is, it might just be a little bit of a silly rig. Anyways, Potman here. Trying to think of something I'd want him to do. We could make him do the hop hop again. We could make him do a roll. We could make him do a little flip potentially. Flip might be a little difficult. I hate doing flips, particularly because a lot of interpolation will want to roll you back around once you go past the 360 mark. Either way, let's make him do like a little shuffle. So we're gonna take our first leg, and I'm just going to go pose to pose. I'm going to take up his leg here. This is an IK rig, if you didn't follow the last class. IK meaning inverse kinematics. It means that the bones in the designated chain here are going to follow my bone that I'm controlling now, as opposed to do everything independently. Easy way, again, to see that is, I'm going to move this. That's an FK rig. That means all the bones after it follows it. Anyways, I'm going to start rotating here. Typically, you want to use rotation. Some of these translation and transform will even be off, but I'm just going to try to find a pose I want to. Making sure to be in pose mode. This is our knee pull. It was part of the rig that we built. So when we do, oh god, the knee pull has some weight painting stuff on the lip, and I have no idea how that happened. Either way, we're going to use the knee pull to sort of bring in our knee potentially right here because we want him to do like a little shuffle slide. We're going to bring him down, and we're going to start looking for a pose that we like. I'm going to do this very quickly. We're going to go to Object, select our rig object. Just a quick refresher on weight painting. Weight paint mode. I could have sworn that this fella had some, yeah, he did. We're just gonna make sure there's no influence on this knee to any part of our rig. Likewise over here. Well, any part up here. The knee pull should not be doing that. Anyways, going back, let's go back to object mode, let's touch our rig, let's go back to pose mode. Nothing should have changed, and now much nicer. Let's just keep moving things around. So we want our guy to shuffle. That means that one leg might be extended, one leg's going to be further back. And you know what? One of the most important things you can do in animation is to look up reference material. So I'm going to go past our Chinese learning game here, and let's look up shuffle animation. I used to remember the name for it. Let's see. Okay. So here is a lady, and she is doing the shuffle. And we can see that the certain key pose, I don't really think this is the best animation, but we can see where the key poses sort of work. She has her hands move, she has the overlapping animation on her top half here, her head going back, and the hair sort of rigged in a certain way, and that she does a certain little hop. So our over has the knee up. She has a quick release up here. Honestly, I don't think this is really the best shuffle. I don't think you bring the knee up like a walk cycle in here. Yeah, I think this is way better. Okay. Shuffle guy here. This is something we can follow. While our character is not as long-legged, unfortunately, we can take the sort of principles here and maybe lift his leg up as he brings it up. So it looks like the key components to a shuffle is in our first frame to have the things completely extended out. Our in-between is almost like both 1 foot up, 1 foot down. Let's see. And our hands, honestly, our hands can do things that we want to. It's kind of the part where you can be expressive and add appeal, and making sure to sort of add a little head rock on here. Let's see. Hey! Once again, Dell with the wonderful
We can do a full 8 count. Here we go. Again, just remember, if you're not used to doing this step, there's a link in the description box that only
Dell with a wonderful suggestion up here.
Exactly on
As this guy,
description box.
I swear.
Leg down here, and then you're gonna switch here. One more time. 5, 6, 7, 8. Kick, step, switch. Good.
We're not going to be doing all of that, unfortunately. But he brings up a very good point that if you're looking for a reference, be sure to try to find a lot of places you can find reference. So just looking at other people's animation like I was doing, it can be pretty silly at certain points. Because honestly, dancers are people who do that stuff for their whole life. And they very much understand the motion. Anyways, so for stuff like this, where I'm trying to get motion to really sell on the ground, I like to use the sort of direct camera angles here, so I can really hone in on what they might look like, just in case my rig isn't as truthful as it should be. As you get better at rigging, these problems will become less apparent, but I ain't a master at rigging. Wish I was, maybe one day. Sorry about all this sort of goofy camera controlling here in Blender. If you want to center on something again in Blender, Alt mouse button, middle mouse button will give you a new center of your camera. I've just gotten used to doing maybe suboptimal stuff when doing rotations in Blender. Anyways, so I'm going to bring the hips out a little forward on him. I'm just going to sort of, so we can get the legs going forward. Remembering that Pop Man here, we specifically painted him and rigged him in a way that would reflect hard surface modeling because he is a cauldron and he is not an organic being. So his hips are going to have to move all the way with him when we do something like this, as opposed to a different sort of model, like a normal human being, which would likely, in this case, just be able to move his spine or various other parts of the body and catch up. Gosh, sometimes when I press Alt, it goes a little bit too far. Anyways, let's get over here, trying to be flush. We're going to probably move him down a little bit. We're going to try to get our first pose. Sorry, man. Sometimes Blender Camera stuff in Blender can be a nightmare sometimes. But I think, in truth, I have just gotten used to it instead of gotten better at it. So take that for what you will. But I am going to make his toes move like this. So we have a little bit of, I guess, drop in the ankle that then goes up. We can also use this angle to get a very good look at the sort of floor, using the red as a baseline here. And I think that this foot should be maybe a little more flat. Let's bring that up. Nah. We're gonna just use this, and we're gonna keep this down here. Okay. Next, I think that the foot should be a little more forward. Oh man, sometimes you press Alt and it just wants to go wherever it wants to go. Anyways. We do have a hip controller here that we made for just tiny influencing. So let's use it just a little bit and make this seem a little more extreme. We don't need to touch this at all. This is handled by our IK. Our knee pole, however, we can move around and it just acts as a target for our knee. It tries to aim to it. So if we bring it in closer, he'll bring his knee lower to the ground. Likewise here, if we bring the knee over here, and we're starting to get a little shuffle pose. And we're going to move him forward. And the last thing I'm going to do is bring this foot a little bit more flush with the ground. Alright, I kind of like it. Even if it's not a shuffle, he looks like he's creeping, and I like that. Okay, this is at the end of his shuffle step, or presumably the start. Really, since you shift legs, it doesn't matter. I'm going to look at our reference again, and I'm going to say that which way is he going to lean his body against when we do this? So I think the knee that is in front, he kind of leans back against, it looks like to me. I wish I could slow this down, to tell you the truth. Let's try that. Knowing that our pot man, again, love him as he is essentially a hard surface model. That's part of the fun of this model for me, was that he was going to be this dork who could not really move his spine whatsoever. And I kind of like that. I like having his head up here on his foot and his back is over there. And I think we're starting to get a better look. Okay, cool. And if you're wondering why I'm not setting keyframes right now, which would be a good thing to wonder, for this first pose, typically in my own workflow, I would kind of get the first pose in and then keyframe everything, just because it will be my reference pose if I'm doing a loop for the final frame as well. But if you feel a little bit I don't know, scared about having this much work just sort of sitting out there in the ether, press A. You can either press I or right click. Try to do it within the viewport. And I'm going to do it for location, rotation, and scale. And that means that we have our first pose locked in. There are fun stuff about the location, rotation, and scale stuff that we might get into later. Blender has some pretty fun abilities for squash and stretch with location, rotation, and scale that can let you sort of do rad stuff if you want to. All right. So I think some counter sort of movement here would be kind of cool. So like having his arm point forward on his back foot and give him a little wave. To me, while maybe his front leg is going to the back, his front arm rather, is going down here. By the way, this is forward kinematics. How with our IK, you may remember that I positioned boned everything with this bottom part, which was his like heel bone, and the legs followed. Forward kinematics is different insofar as they're going to follow each chain of the bone along the way, and if I want to change this, it'll change the ones after it. Typically, FK will be used more on arms and fingers than it will be on legs. But I have seen so many rigs that actually offer the option to do both and change certain key properties in order to let you play with both. And I think that's cool. The last rig I made in Maya had that ability, and it actually, for that non-standard rig, made things super easy for me to do some advanced motion with it. It was like a cockroach lady, and she did little scuttle motions. And sometimes she would use 2 legs, and sometimes she would use 6 legs, and having the ability to switch between FK and IK was really cool for that. Anyways, here are his eye stalks. Where we want his eyes to be, that's up to you. Really, for a lot of this is up to you. Just trying to remember that like what you're trying to do right now is get a key frame. So like something that you can really sort of, a really solid, good pose that like, I don't know, you could hang on for a few seconds if you needed to. This uses a stretch 2 limb. I think this is really neat. Stretch 2 components in Blender are typically good for stuff like tentacles and, I don't know, bendy bits, noodles, who knows. We can use bendy bones. If we don't like how the sort of segmented animation is looking right now, we can go into our bone properties where it says bendy bones. We can add segments to it and sort of add subdivisions. I'm going to keep it at 5, but there's no harm in adding more if you want to, if you want it more rigid or if you want it less rigid. So let's bring his eye up here. And what would be a good way to counter? I feel like he should have something he's looking at, maybe. Even though in my animation I like the idea of him having independent eyes that he could look at 2 different things, but let's give him something to see. Maybe he's just looking at the camera. That wouldn't be too strange, huh? If you're dancing, you want to look at your audience. And you know what? He might creep around the back here and look at you from on top, like that. And like that, we might have our first key pose. Keeping in mind that like this is still a class that, you know, has to start and end at a certain time. You could technically work on a pose forever until you get something just right, but for this pose, I think I am happy with this. So we're going to A, select all your bones. A just selects all of whatever current thing you're in Blender. So if you're in a mesh, it'll select all your vertices, your edges, whatever you have highlighted. I, insert keyframe, location, rotation, and scale. I'm sorry, I make barf noises when I say things wrong. And what we're going to do is we're going to think about maybe whenever our animation is going to end. And we're just going to put the same keyframe here. That way, when we get to this point, it's going to loop. And since we're in Graph Editor right now, but we're not really doing that next bit of motion, I think it's probably better to go into Dope Sheet, finding this little guy over here, clicking that and going to Dope Sheet. Technically, the two editors can do much of the same. I just find this to be less visually cluttered. And I think that graph editors are better for hitting your curves when you actually just want like the exact motion there. Also, if I'm going too late or anything, don't worry. This is all going to be put in VODs, and like I technically have another hour and a half to work on this before I have to pretty much get to work. So I will be here for a little bit. Anyways, let's see. 30, 50, good halfway point is probably 90. One of the fun things you can do in Blender is if we copy, and we can go to the summary at the very top. If you press it, you can copy, and it will select all the things in that sort of thing, channel, and paste flipped. And it tries its best. Specifically for non-standard rigs, it's not going to do the best job in the world. So sometimes it's better to maybe select the bones that are working and see if you can paste them flipped. Blender, like all of us, has faults. So let's copy this. Let's try paste flipped. I wonder if that might also be, I think everything is properly labeled here. Heal to L, heal to R, should be. I don't know, with humanoid stuff, this works better. But sometimes, you know, you just gotta do it the old-fashioned way. Boo-hoo. There are a lot of ways we can sort of do this easier, though. We can look at our transform settings here and go from there. So let's say that these are the sort of Z coordinates we want here. Going into frame 90, we can just copy this, paste it here. Oh yeah, that's right, not right. Z will bring us up. So let's copy X, paste it here, and then I'll bring him to the same X coordinate, essentially, as the one over there. That would also maybe be on a perfectly mirrored mesh. We may not be using one right now, so we're just going to make do. And we're going to try to match up by going into this sort of perspective mode. Actually, no, I know the problem here. It's not that. It's that we haven't moved the hip controller. So, actually, the easiest thing we can flip is probably just clicking here, copy, paste flipped, and he's going to be moving in another direction now. His hip is now centered over there. We can kind of see how he does the little shimmy shake over here. That's fine. That's exactly what we want. Now, let's try doing the same thing I said we were going to do earlier. Going here, making sure that this is selected. Alright, so, you know, I always wished in Maya you could just control click and copy all of these and put it in the transformation property. That might work. Keeping in mind, I am also not a complete mastermind of this stuff. I learn stuff new every day. Yeah, okay. I like this. I'm going to bring this foot forward. I'm going to actually put these rotations to 1, 0, 0, 0. And he might not be moving perfectly symmetrical, but I don't mind that. We're going to move our pole in front again. And we're just going to try to move this guy along to what we want. Better rigs that are more professional, I'm going to tell you, will for sure just let you mirror stuff, but we're using what we got. Sorry, folks. Bring that down so it's flush again. Bring it further up. As up, maybe as further up as we can. Let's bring this in. Let's make sure that that's rotationally okay. What about you? You're for the most part rotationally okay. I'm gonna bring this rotation a little bit further down. And we're getting to something I'm a little happier with. 1, 0, 0, 0. Okay, let's fix this up. Into a keyframe that we like. I think that looks okay. Doing the same thing over here that we did in the past. I'm gonna actually just keep working with this keyframe, so I'm gonna actually do another all location rotation scale. So there's I, location rotation scale. You can already see that things are starting to take shape, but thanks to this, we get a certain idea of how we want this to move. And I'm gonna bring this in, bring that up, bring this down, and we're starting to get our second pose. See, this is the one that I wonder if we just face flipped. Yeah, no, he's just going to try to flip the other way, when really we want him to flip the other action, which is fine. The guy on our last animation didn't have symmetrical animation. Ours doesn't have to either. Symmetrical animation is great for walk cycles, it's great for run cycles, it's great for a lot of stuff, and it can also save you a ton of time. So it's me saying all this stuff that like, I'm fine that's not symmetrical. It doesn't necessarily mean that like you should ever aim for things not to be symmetrical. Like, symmetry is nice. It's all over art. But also means that you should never be burdened by it if you feel like what you're trying to make shouldn't be that way. Asymmetry is pretty cool too. Alright, so this eye was going forward, and what if he just continues to wrap around? Let's get him a little bit that way, and we have our secondary eye stalk here. I can look up, and maybe he goes a little bit higher up and looks down at you. And for this guy, let's have him just sort of scan the perimeter and go right over here, and we'll kind of bring him this way. And we'll have him similarly still looking at the camera. So now we have two frames, kind of. The only thing I think is weak is this arm right now. I don't feel entirely sold by. Alright, that's a little better. I think we could do more with the arms, but I'm going to save this keyframe for now. Again, location, rotation, and scale. But obviously, that's not enough, right? These are just two frames that, if we played them, look at them slowly moving around. And also, I would say at this point, we can find out that 150 frames is too much. So let's go and bring it down from 150. We can grab this top one up here, bring it down to 60, and bring this one to 90. And we're going to also see this little stuff down here. That's our entire editor. We can bring it down to 90 as well. That's our preview window. So when we press play, it gets a little closer. I can also say that I don't even know if we need that many frames. So we're going to go from 60 to 50 and 50 to 70. All right, now we're starting to get the shuffle that we want. I'm going to bring his head a little bit in when he does this and do that. I just think that might be a little bit more, well, let's see. How is his head here? It's up and to the side. You know what we can do? We can start putting our in-between frames. This will be probably our cross or our over frame. We're going to, I don't like doing all keyframes on our in-between, or not our over or pass-through frame as much, because there's oftentimes like sort of levels of overlapping animation that I think can get lost. But for this case, I am going to bring his head down. I'm going to find what I consider to be his leading feet. So he's going to bring that in. I'm going to have him lean against it. I'm just going to give that a location, rotation, and scale. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Down, a little forward, and this. And this will sort of serve as our basis for our it's a through thing for the walk frame. But yeah, now we're starting to see that there's some clunk to his animation, right? It's sold a little better. His shuffle is starting to really move, right? It's no longer this very static, silly thing. He's starting to look like a real guy. We're going to do more to massage that later on, don't worry. But for right now, I think I like this as our through phase. So let's check on our pose for now. Fun thing about 3D animation is a lot of these frames will often be like halfway interpolated for you. Making sure to use our cardinal directions. We're going to move around. And we're just going to make sure that everything's touching the floor right now. I'm pretty okay with this being here. I'm going to do more changes to it later. For this guy, I actually might want him a little bit higher off the ground. Like, I want maybe just the tip of his foot touching as he's dragging it back. So I might do something like this. And let's bring his knee mostly so it's just as straight as can be. And what works better? Hip up, or I don't know. Let's give him a little reveal. Let's give him a little hip up. Okay. So I'm going to put keyframes on these because I think these are important to the motion we're trying to sell. You know, I might consider putting it further back. Yeah, I like this. So, knowing that the shuffle has a lot of like really important frames in it, like a lot of times you can even just think of the shuffle as like just hitting your mark and then getting there fast. So potentially we could even move this frame, like, well, not all of them. This has been an annoying and frustrating thing with Blender, that sometimes it feels the need to grab more frames than you want. So you see, kind of like our slow in, slow out stuff, if we ratchet up the pace at certain points, the motion might be sold a little better. But we're going to think about keyframe placement a little bit further along the line. That's often stuff that I like to do when I'm more pleased with my pose-to-pose stuff. I'm actually going to bring this foot in a little bit more and going to bring this down. I want this to be flush with our ground, so let's do this. If his foot is going forward, actually, we probably want it to drag a little bit. So up, foot in, foot down, And we can even play with this if we want to. It doesn't do too much, it just sort of moves the ankle. Let's make sure it looks good from all angles. I think it could look a little bit closer like that. And let's look at our knee pull. I don't know if our knee pull is quite functioning the way we want it to. It's a little high up right now. But considering the man has a pot, sometimes emotion is lost in there. You know, I kind of like this. Okay, so let's grab the frames we just messed with, which is going to be most of the leg, and insert location rotation scale. Oh god, actually I did that in the wrong frame. How embarrassing. The fun thing about that though is... Wait, did I? No, I did. Cool. Fun thing about that, as I was saying, it's in the wrong frame for now. But not anymore. Oh, I see what's missing. We didn't grab him. I'm gonna grab it a little further up. Further up, further back, so there's a... Yeah, let's do that. I like this pose better. Okay. Anyways, it's important to know that I can't condense a whole, like, I don't know, animation class in just 2 hours. People spend their entire lives getting better on this. But little things like this are the things that you will start to learn and help you with your own style of animation going forward. So like finding your pose-to-pose animations and getting some really solid poses on those are going to sell whatever you make, especially, I'm going to clarify, like, this is a 3D animation course, but this can apply to 2D animation, but especially in 3D animation, make sure that you have some good, solid pose-to-pose work, because it's going to help you immensely in the in the long run, to be able to look at what you make, know that you have solid starting points, know that the computer is not always going to be great at interpolating your next sort of action, and having the control to sort of say, like, no, this is what I want it to do right now. Because ultimately, like, 3D animation is, in a lot of ways, all pose-to-pose when it comes to character animation. So just really try to find your good spots and ratchet in on it. I want that knee up. We're not going to touch our IK. It's already being controlled by that. And insert location scale. We're starting to get a good little shuffle out of him. And if this looks a little funky, a lot of things, something I will often do is just take the last keyframe off and it'll look a little smoother. And we're getting closer to what we want, right? It's maybe not perfectly there, but we're getting a little creep on this guy's shuffle. So what else can we do? Well, we obviously didn't animate the arms, did we? How would his arms be in this situation? Well, let's look at the previous keyframe. He had an arm down, the other frame was up, kind of doing a wave. We can maybe follow him in the same sort of way that we had before, insofar as like have him just sort of moving to this next stuff. But like, what would be a more fun way to go up there? Well, he could bend his arm. He can do it like a robot, right? He could kind of go like, meh, and then out. So let's try that. I don't know. I feel like in dance stuff, a lot of your appeal can come from the stuff that you do with your hands. If only just personally, because I suck at doing any sort of dancing that doesn't involve my legs. I can move my legs around like a goofball. But when it comes to actually moving my arms, it's like, what the hell do I do with these things? These strange, just attachments to my body. I don't understand. Anyways, my goofiness aside, I think that you feel in your hands when you're doing this sort of stuff. So think about how your hands are going to go into the next frame of your animation when you're doing this. I guess specifically for a dance, but really for a lot of stuff. You can add a lot of appeal to a walk cycle if you want. I'm going to give him rigid robot hands. So now he goes, but, like almost like he's pushing it out. Wow. I kind of like that. Wow. Wow. I don't know how many other people make silly noises when they're doing animations, but I certainly do, and I will never stop. Anyways, let's go into our next pose, or next part of our pose. Here, honestly, I wanted this guy to do a silly wave, so I'm going to take most of this frame. I'm going to copy it. I'm actually going to use it as a basis for what I'm doing here, because I think that he should complete his wave. He would want to, right? And keeping in mind that there will be some inertia, okay, so I need to exaggerate this more because it's not reading that he's trying to do a wave. So I'm going to move him all the way over here. And for this, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. I am once again going to use this as a basis. Now we're starting to see a wave, right? For here, though, I think his wave should end. In our next in-between. And this is definitely still a key pose, a keyframe rather, so this is something that you have to, I would think about for all of my sort of pose-to-pose drawing. Okay. Oh, well, that's a sign that someone's using Mugen at work. Oh, you guys didn't see that because it's covered up by other stuff. Alright, now we're starting to get a nice little creepy walk. Right? He's got a little attitude in here. I can see the parts that maybe aren't perfect, though. This guy's knee over here is a little rubbery. I think he can probably go a little more forward in his walk. He does have a nice sneaky walk, though. I'm not sure about this eye. I think these eye danglers could do a little bit more. I like them being a little more fluid. I do like how he's popping out at the end of this frame. I think that looks cool. So let's make that pop out exaggerated. Let's take it further back. And let's put a keyframe here. And since we maybe don't worry too much about where this will be exactly at the end, we could even make our keyframe somewhere like here. So bring them here, insert keyframe. That's a little much, huh? Yeah, I'm gonna actually move his eye keyframes up here. So, wow. And it might sort of give you an anticipatory notion of his walk. Let's see. I don't know. I think it kind of works. It definitely needs some massaging, so to speak, but I'm not upset with it. I'm more upset with its retreat afterwards. So going to here, I probably want him to first sort of go all the way back and rotate inward just a little bit. Yeah, let's see. It definitely needs to hang on that for a little bit too. So we're going to copy our keyframe one more time. You know what? This is where we're going to start using the graph editor. So back over here, back to our graph editor. We're going to zoom in, and we're going to notice that there is a sharp raise in this graph, right? We can either lower it to give it less of an incline. We can play with the graph this way to give you sort of more anticipatory frames between the next movement. We can bring this frame up, and we can create a better Bezier curve into the next motion, which is probably the right thing to do. So, wow. We're still not necessarily getting the hang that we want, so let's bring the Bezier curve like this. A little bit more hang. We'll start to get a better looking curve. And what do I mean by a better looking curve? Honestly, at some point, I would just like to imagine that you just eventually know what a better looking curve is like. But this is still too dramatic. So I think that also means that we can bring this down a little bit. Let's look at our other curves. I don't know. I'm going to come back to that. But I do know that I wanted this to sort of trace along the top, and I don't think it's necessarily doing as good of a job at that as I want to. So we're going to hit our normal keyframes on 40 and stuff like that. We're going to keep it here. Staging is important here so we can actually see where we want to go. Usually I would have an active camera I'm referencing. For the sake of time, we're not going to do that. I am going to lift him a little bit further up. I'm going to curve him along the side here. We're actually going to go over this one. And we're going to do the opposite over here. We're going to use this as reference on how high it should be. Okay. That is definitely going a little too intense. But you know what? I kind of now think that I'd rather this eye just follow him. Remembering this is frame 30, so we're just going to have to copy this frame and paste it at the end here, but you know, we're gonna have to probably go back to the dope sheet really quick and just scrub a lot of the old keyframes for him out. Which is fine, you know, you're gonna hit dead ends. You're gonna make mistakes. Everyone does. I definitely want it like this. So our keyframe, location, rotation, and scale. Frame 50. Gonna have him sort of greet him here. Gonna raise him up, have him look down, move over here. Maybe get a little bit of overlapping animation by having him twist over the side. And we're going to push him back too. Let's see how this looks. Now he kind of has dueling in 10A, which honestly to me is better than the other one. But with all this, I hope that at least you see that there is a little bit you can do to make a quick animation be a lot more sort of compelling in just a small amount of time by using sort of your keyframes, your pose to pose, your appeal, accelerating action. Like basically, if you want to continue on from this, just use the 12 principles. I'm at this point just being a little redundant, just having fun. Remember, animation takes time. Remember, animation should be a fun process. Remember that these things can help you with almost anything you do. And I don't want to take up too much time because I have to get to work in a little bit, and this has already been an hour and 30 minutes. But at least thank you for watching. I hope that you know that all these sort of things, I will teach y'all how to export. Hopefully, maybe the last class will just be a great big export day. But next up is shading, rendering, and exporting, actually. So we'll go through all of that later. And hopefully y'all learned something watching this. If not, sorry, next time. Y'all have a good day.